My name is Vernon J. I'm the CEO over at Equity Coin. We are the first digital token backed by affordable housing in the United States. And it's just an absolute pleasure to be on the call with so many people from all over the world. I'm a real estate guy through and through. It runs through my veins. I've been in the multifamily space for 17 years now, and I've done a little bit under $200 million in transactions as a real estate broker. So I'm excited to talk about how Equity Coin is birthing this new sharing equity economy using Web3 and affordable housing, as well as real estate crowdfunding. Excited to talk.
Thank you, Venom.
Sure,
Yep.
I'll go next. My name is Chris Bates. I am a cybersecurity specialist, and I have worked in the past with Bitland as an organization that focused on registering properties onto blockchains that were built locally. And it was an organization that was focused on distributing education to help the proper solution be fit to the proper local culture. I'm currently working at Smart Contract Research Forum as the lead on the Pan-African Grants Program that does research into what case studies have been executed to then find African academics to supplement the case studies where they are not present.
Thank you, Chris.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, John.
Hi, good morning. My name is John Bridgewater. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bluestone Technologies. We're the founder of BID out here in the Bahamas. And what we've built is basically digital infrastructure to allow persons to not only create a biometric unique ID, but leveraging that ID to in various different ecosystems, whether it's financial payments, whether it's self-sovereign, identity for land ownership, titles, etc. We've created a super platform that allows persons to uniquely use their identity across various different spectrums.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for the intro. All right. Is there anyone left behind, or we all in? We did all our intros. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Veron. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, John. Yes, as the topic of the day is, about land ownership, about asset ownership, and the key is buying up the block. I think for some of you, if you've done the research, you'll know that this actually is it's an idea for calling the Black community to have ownership, or putting back ownership in the hands of the Black community. It's about keeping those resources that are generated by the Black community to keep them within the community. So today we are looking at how Web3 can really help the Black community to have Black ownership, or to have access to land and to have access to assets. So maybe you can kick off by asking ourselves a question. Do people really understand Web3? So such that we can be able to start talking about putting ownership on the Web3. Do people really understand that? Our community, is it really educated enough?
So I can speak to that. For the most part, I don't think most people really understand Web3, but if you extrapolate that further, most people don't understand the things that they use in the daily lives. So if I was to ask people like, how does Zoom work?
Yeah.
Do you know how Zoom works without Googling it? Probably not. It's not your fault, but we are subject to so many technologies and engineering feats that we use in our daily lives. Is that we don't really have the time to learn how refrigerators work, or how monitors work, or how the internet even works. So it's on specialists to apply these technologies in places where they're invisible anyway, in the sense of when we're talking about securing information or property, anything that needs to be secured. So for example, one's email account. It's like if I asked a person, how does your password work? Most people don't understand how their passwords even work. So it's a matter of, it's not whether people understand how the technology works or not. Is the technology implemented in a way that makes it invisible so that they don't have to understand how it works? So, and currently Web3 is not really that well implemented. So the user interface and the user interactions are too obtuse so that it makes it difficult for people to use. So the more that technology becomes invisible, the easier it will be for people to actually use it.
Okay. Thank you so
Chris.
much. Yep.
Chris, those are great points, man. And I was just speaking at the Ocala Crypto Summit over in Florida just 2 days ago, and I asked the audience a simple question. I asked them, how many people have a website? And everybody raised their hand, right? Every single person raised their hand. It was about 99%. And then I asked the same question. I said, how many people have their own token? How many people have their own smart contract? And it was almost, nobody raised their hand. And I think there's a really clear parallel between Web3, the emergence of Web3 and the emergence of the internet 25 years ago. If I asked 25 years ago, in a room full of people or business owners, how many people have a website, it would have been the same percentage of people who have tokens today. So I think what we're seeing is, just like how I can create a website and literally by the time we're off this call, I can create a really sick, dope website using Squarespace, using GoDaddy, WordPress. It's become so ubiquitous. It's become so easy. And it's not only become easy, but it's almost become a necessity. If you have a business, it's a necessity to have a website. And I think very similarly with tokenization, in 20 years from today, every business is going to be tokenized. Every company is going to have a token in some form or fashion. So I think, what we like to do, and one of our I would say most valuable trademarks with equity platforms is the sharing equity economy. And I think, again, I think about Airbnb, I think about Uber, I think about, the sharing economy 1.0, where if 20 years ago I said, we're going to sleep at a stranger's home, you would probably laugh me out of the room. Or if I said that we were going to ride in a stranger's car, you wouldn't take me too seriously. But now we're starting to see that people are gravitating towards the sharing equity economy. And the next iteration is the disruption of banks. So now with getting funding for real estate, for example, specifically what we do with equity platforms, now this sharing equity economy is going to replace the bank with community. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And I can concur a lot with Vernon and Chris were saying. I think that it doesn't, but really to what Chris is saying, it doesn't really matter the understanding of the technology itself. If we were to really question how everything works in the world today, we wouldn't really get anything done because we're too busy questioning. I think that the advancement of the technology, to Vernon's point, is that we're still early. We're still early. And the great thing about Web3 today is that you have a lot of no-code platforms that are starting to launch, which is, to Vernon's point, it's going to get easier and easier for persons to create their own smart contracts, to launch their own DAOs, to launch their own tokens, etc., which then feeds into having the technology easily distributable, but also user-friendly, which is pointing back to Chris's point. We're at the stage where, even in the 21st century, in the 2020s, it's still pretty difficult for people to create websites and to create platforms and stuff like that. Like they're just now getting exposed. And with the advent of this technology, now that exposure is catching up, you basically see a gap starting to close. Whereas in the early days in Web 2, most Black people didn't have technology startups. to launch, because everyone was still picking up traditional professions, doctors, lawyers, and stuff like that, professions that we didn't have or our community wasn't so abundant of during the 50s, 60s, 70s type era. Now, with the advent of Web3, to Chris's point about equity and inclusion, and to Vernon's point about equity and inclusion, and to Chris's point about the technology, you're now seeing people in our community leveraging that to now get easier access, to raise funds, and to do other things. My point to a lot of persons in our conversations, even here in the Bahamas, as it relates to land titles, ownership, and anything resolving around Web3, you can't, it's just new digital infrastructure. And you essentially can't have a digital economy without first having digital citizens. And that's why we built our digital identity platform. So when you do own a token, you do own an NFT that's associated to your land title, persons aren't squatting on your land, at least in generations to come, those individuals or those descendants can actually now leverage that digital identity and actually prove their rights to ownership to anything that they have, whether it's a token or whether it's a part of that land deed or anything else of the sort.
Real quick, I want to speak to that in that we are at a point where our history was actively destroyed so that it seems like we weren't in a place of equity, in that when Black Wall Street existed and it was bombed, we had doctors, we had airlines, we had our own, it wasn't even about segregation so much as we had people in positions of having ascended to a certain level of capital efficiency and effectiveness in the grand scheme. And those things were bombed and literally burned out of existence. So then it was made to seem as if we never got to that point. So our history is like, in America, it makes it seem like, oh, we went from slavery to now, when in fact we had a lot of economic success, but that success was literally burned and destroyed and then written out of the history books so that people only learned about Black Wall Street through science fiction. So this is where something like a decentralized ledger is more resistant to being bombed or being burnt. It's not as easy to destroy the trace of ownership, so that if someone burnt or bombed a person away from their land, the digital deed would make it so that, yeah, right now they're under duress, but we have a ledger to show that that person still actually owns that land no matter what's happening.
Yeah, that's a good point that you just brought in here, Chris. I do believe when all that burning was happening in Tusker, a lot of things were lost, a lot of information was lost, and a lot of people were left with nothing to show that they were once part of this Black Wall Street community. But now with the Web3, it's making things to be permanent and to be permanently embedded on the blockchain. So I think that was a good point that you came up with right there, and it fits very well on the discussion.
Yeah, and as I understand, they actually have an investigation going on in America right now, investigating what transpired in Oklahoma around that time. I see it now happening, and they're now trying to recover remains and stuff like that, so persons can get their retributions who own the land. And with digital identities and Web3 today, you can actually, as Chris is saying, at least in a more modern version. Right now, it is just wallet addresses. It's just still premature. So we have the opportunity, once our community starts to understand how important it is to get involved with this technology, and once platforms are building, no-code solutions that are drag and drop solutions, it will be easier for our community to not only get involved, take advantage, and pass it on to the next generation coming forward.
Yeah. How do we make it possible that our community, like normally when we talk about the developments that are happening, especially like in the Web3, we are focused mostly maybe in certain areas in the country, and we find that certain places in the community are ignored. So how do we make sure that we get everybody involved so that at the end of the day, they're part of people that will own maybe a small amount of shares in property or small amount of shares in assets? How do we bring all these people in to be part of the movement?
I think that one of the, and to back to Chris's point, and my experience, I'm technical. I started off when I was 14, writing programs, cheat codes for online popular games, selling those subscriptions for $25 a month, and we scaled to 1 million users at our peak. And one of the things that I realized during that time was it's not about the back end technology. It's about the front end, the user interface, the user experience. That's the biggest hurdle, not just facing our community getting into Web3, but much larger adoption in the Web3 space in general. It's the UI, UX, and too many developers and projects are focused on trying to get rich quick, as opposed to building lasting technologies that will see the profits over time. And you saw this actually happen during the dot-com bubble. Everyone had an internet startup. And when the dot-com bubble burst, only a few platforms were left standing. And you see a lot of this now happening even in the space today in Web3. I think that there's just so many projects focused on ways to get rich, as opposed to ways to embed the technology. Like we use Microsoft Word, we use Google Doc, we use these technologies that have become a part of our everyday lives. And until we focus the development of these applications to benefit our everyday lives, that's when I believe that we will start to cross those hurdles, like getting into the educational system, decentralizing the history. Developers have to get to a point where it's not about getting rich right now, but in the next 5 years, we can realize those gains.
Well, John, to that point, man, to that point, bro, it's, I see blockchain as a revolutionary technology disguised as a casino, and it's incredible to think about, even with the gold rush, 90% of the gold diggers were not the ones who, they all went bankrupt. A lot of them went bankrupt. The people who were succeeded were the people who created the tools, the pitchforks, the shovels.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's and one thing that really bothered me, because Jay-Z is like, I'm in New York right now. I live in LA, but I'm literally a few blocks away from where he grew up, and I grew up here as well. And him with Jack Dorsey coming together, creating the Bitcoin Academy, kind of ruffled my feathers, because I thought about it really long and deep. I said, why did they not create the Blockchain Academy? Why are they not teaching kids how to develop smart contracts instead of teaching them how to invest in Bitcoin? I know that it serves Square's interest, blocks interest, to get more people from the hood or from Black people to have wallets, Bitcoin wallets, but that's not where the juice is. And just to your point, John, I think even if we're not developers, even if you're just a business person, or if you have ideas of creating efficiencies in different industries, it's so important to learn about smart contracts, because it's almost a fact that if you know how to build a smart contract, you know how to navigate it, you know how to create a comprehensive functionality within a smart contract, you will never go broke. You'll always have capital. You'll always have ability to create capital. So I'm a big proponent of that, John, for sure.
So I'm on the same page on all those things, except I want to speak to the other point in that when we're talking about these technologies, if you look at how they're deployed, that speaks to how the person deploying it or organization deploying it intends to be used. So if we're talking about farmers in places with low literacy rates, if the UX and UI is heavily dependent on words, that's not going to work. So one of the things that I've learned in deploying is, like, when we went to different places, the more the interface was reliant on symbols and not like words, the easier it would be to deploy the same interface in Haiti or Uganda or Kenya. So this is where, if we're talking about actual rural farmers that have a super low literacy rate, the interface to put their information on the blockchain has to recognize that those people are in a certain situation, that you can't just leapfrog them to being literate and understanding how to use these interfaces. So if something's deploying and not recognizing the actual users as to
It
their
has to be user
culture,
friendly.
it has to be, or else it's actually just trying to exploit this hype around it. And just to that notion, like the people who are in like a situation where they're oppressed or minorities, they can't go learn smart contracts. They have to worry about getting killed by cops.
Yeah.
They have to worry about
Yeah.
getting breakfast. There's a whole bunch of things that people can't realistically just go learn smart contracts. So it's like, if we're going to include that lowest class of people who are already oppressed, we have to realistically approach them and say, hey, they're not going to be able to, you can't proportionally buy into wealth. Like, you can't invest your way out of poverty. It just doesn't mathematically work. So we're going to have to lift them up in the sense of collective responsibility, or ujima, in that those people are our responsibility to help pull up. So if we need to invest in means of pulling them out of that poverty situation, that's what we have to do, instead of just expecting them to go learn smart contracts, because they can't realistically do that.
Well, I disagree with that, man. I disagree with the notion that people who might not have the means can't learn how to.
Not that they can't, it's that it's not realistic, because I work with like underprivileged high school kids, and they have to deal with like carrying their families. When you're talking about 17-year-olds that have to like carry their family and have to work after school, it's not really realistic. They're already overworked, they're already under duress. So expecting a 17-year-old kid who might be pregnant, who might be already paying their way through the house, to go learn smart contracts is not a realistic expectation on that people, or in that demographic, which is why I feel like the rhetoric needs to be like less onus of responsibility on people who are in poverty and under duress. Like, we have to stop expecting those people to be able to overcome their trauma and overcome their poverty by themselves. Like, they need help, and we have to change the rhetoric to make it like stop seeming like they can just pull themselves out, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like the argument on both sides. Oh, sorry.
And just to even, I see the argument, and I grew up in foster care, so I didn't have my parents around for me to go to after school programs and pick up a computer. I just picked up a computer because it was around with some of the homes that I was bouncing around. And, it's just, to both of Vernon and Chris's point, but Vernon's perspective, I see it as there are kids who can definitely pick up the computer and learn smart contracts, etc. But to Chris's point, those kids that are picking up the computer and learning up smart contracts, essentially, until those kids can get out of the ghetto, essentially, or can get out of their situation where they can now retreat and to build smart contracts and join the other percentage of the community that's building, essentially one is going to have to carry the weight for the other. And that's just been happening from time. Mathematically, when you go to the Department of Statistics, when you go to the US Commerce, the Federal Bureau of Statistics, et cetera, when you look at the statistics online, if you want to just even get into the data, 30% of white Americans are on welfare. So that means the other 63% of white Americans are carrying the load for that 30% of Americans that are on welfare. The reality is, we as Black people have to get over the mentality of everyone has to be able to do it. Some of us will have to take the burden for the rest of them, and they will have to pick it up later. And that's just how the generational cycle has gone from time, especially when you look at our history. And the reality is about 40 to 55% of Black men in America are in the middle class. So Black men have started to pull themselves up out of an environment where it was extreme poverty and extreme duress. And sure, there's police brutality and stuff going on, but there's a good percentage of Black men in America that are actually doing the work, showing the work, and pulling those individuals and giving our community a better name. So I wouldn't rely on persons like Jay-Z and Jack Dorsey to put infrastructure in place for kids to be able to go to school. Sure, that's, and at the end of the day, rich people stay with rich people because they have money to do the things. So if you're the only guy with money and you come into a situation where people need money, you're going to be the only resource that's tugged on.